This week on The Record, the push for a state takeover of the city police department reaches a boiling point. Why the police academy director resigned. Bout with history. The author who brings a forgotten hero back to life in stunning displays of political courage in his time. Control of the checkbook. Who could sign their name on the most significant checks to decide the fate of the future of the city of St. Louis? Two more candidates running for comptroller are on the record. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. Tuesday, voters decide if Mayor Tashara Jones advances to the general election next month. And in the same week that she faces the voters, she's fighting to keep local control of the police department. Chief Robert Tracy has lobbied alongside the mayor to kill the Republican-led state takeover. But this week, a wave of stories underscoring ongoing challenges the city has faced in funding upkeep and in filling jobs. Take a look at this. The symbol of decline, as it were, the police academy, is literally crumbling. This big chunk of concrete falling in downtown St. Louis from atop the building. A top city official says perhaps recent freezing temperatures, water, followed by a quick warm-up, plus years of wear and tear, all likely contributed to this incident, sending the window header plunging to the street below. The mayor's spokesperson also says the building itself fell into disrepair when the state was in charge of it.
When we got control of SLMPD back in 2013, this building was already in a state of massive disrepair. The state had kind of let it languish and let these repairs go unaddressed.
Decades since, well, a long list of deferred maintenance. And now the academy director resigned just this week, in part in protest to the facilities falling into further disrepair. In South City, tucked between I-55 and the Mississippi River, perhaps you have seen it driving by. This old dump converted to a police firing range back in the 1980s, but it too, in disrepair, shut down for months now due to deteriorating safety conditions there. One family with police roots was surprised to learn their grandfather's legacy was left to ruin.
And it just so happens that it should be named for my grandpa as well, and there should be a sign at the entrance. He went to his friends and to his family to raise money to build this. The persistence, dedication, and leadership of Lieutenant Colonel William E. Brown resulted in the completion of a unique facility, which is the department's first outdoor firearms training center. They cannot comprehend how the police chief is allowed to take $100,000 extra from private corporations when it should be going to equipment and facilities, and now the equipment and facilities are completely abandoned.
With problems and pressure mounting, the chief intends to return the sign to honor that former officer who raised all the money to build the firing range in the first place. The city is now racing to bring contractors in to fix it, but documents we obtained show the city knew about the repair issues there back in 2023. A Senate committee advanced the state takeover of the city department to the full Senate floor. That's where we'll be watching this week. Mayor Jones is scheduled to sit down for an interview with us on this topic just tomorrow. Tuesday, we vote. Mayor Jones faces challenges from three candidates who will all be on your ballot, all four of them. And you can vote for one of them, none of them, or all of them. Vote for any of them you think would do a good job. That's what approval voting is all about. Only the top two advance to an April 8 runoff. And over the last several weeks, you might remember we brought you interviews with each candidate. Here's a look back at our recent sit-down with Mayor Tashara Jones, who's carrying slumping poll numbers and 4 years of baggage into the contest.
It's a lot. It's a lot. One of the phrases I always use is heavy is the head that wears the crown. And people expect a lot from a mayor's office.
Her top rival, a rematch. Alderwoman Kara Spencer finished in a close second 4 years ago, and she's back, promising greater transparency, generational overhaul of the city's future with the Ram settlement funds, and just a return to the basics.
I have a track record of getting things done. I have a plan for doing some of the things I've talked about, how to better start to address potholes, how to better, do some of the city's services. But at the end of the day, I think what people are really frustrated with is a lack of transparency and a lack of, just good old-fashioned good government.
You won't see his party affiliation on the ballot, but there is a Republican running. We sat down with Andrew Jones, too.
You turn around the crime, the safety issues that are plaguing our particular city. We certainly know that people are saying that crime is down, but it certainly doesn't feel that way. Certainly seems like people may have manipulated numbers.
And then there's the wild card. Recorder of Deeds Michael Butler. Can he play spoiler? Can he break through and somehow pass up a slumping Mayor Tashara Jones? In a race where voters can pick as many candidates as you like, and perhaps shun the ones you don't, How will he stand out from the crowd?
So at the same time running my bar part-time, I was running a government office full-time. So
Right.
I think it's fair to look at how I ran my government office on how I'm going to run the entire government. And we were very successful in my government office in my full-time job. And me ending my business in the Grove in the city was for me to focus more time in government and what I'm good at.
A lot more substance in all these full interviews with the mayoral candidates in our St. Louis primary voter guide. You can find it online now. Also, don't forget to tune in to 5 on Your Side this Tuesday night. We're going to watch the results come in. We'll bring them to you live, and we'll have results airing on 5 Plus all night. We'll be right back with more with 2 candidates after the break. If you're just joining us, Tuesday is the primary election in St. Louis. The local candidates on the ballot, 4 of them running for mayor, 3 of them running for comptroller. Only 2 candidates in each of those races can advance to the April 8th runoff election citywide. We heard last week from Comptroller Darlene Green. More from her in a minute. But let's hear now from the 2 women running against her. Joining us first is former St. Louis Alderwoman and State Representative Donna Behringer. Only 2 can advance to that runoff on April 8th. Why will you be one of them?
Well, I have been serving in the city of St. Louis since 2003. And a lot of people say, well, that was a long time ago. And I go, well, I didn't get into politics on purpose. In fact, I never planned to be in politics. I was running a community development corporation. And so someone had watched me and seen all the development I'd done on South Kings Highway. And so they asked me to run for alderman in 2002, which I did. And then I was an alderman for 14 years here in the city of St. Louis. And of those 8 years, I was on the budget. So I balanced the budget for the city for 8 years. And then I went on to the State House. And I've been in the State House for 8 years, but I served as the ranking member of the Fiscal Review. And I have been doing nothing but deep diving into the city of St. Louis and the ARPA funds and the budget, because it was just something I always did.
So you feel that beyond just the name recognition of voters having seen your name on a ballot for that many years, the experience itself would apply to this role. What would change for workers in the comptroller's office if you became their new boss?
Well, let me back up just a second, because you asked me about my area. I have represented a huge chunk of South St. Louis for a very long time, and I always communicate with a newsletter. So I'm very detail oriented. And when I go to neighborhood meetings, and I go to all of them, that's the difference. I don't just serve, and you might see me once in a while. I'm at every event. I'm at everything. And people know that I will give them the facts, and I will communicate. That's transparency and accountability are huge in what I do.
The Board of Aldermen has already allocated $37 million to North City. And the deadline, the federal deadline to do that has come and gone. So there is nothing that the Board of Aldermen can now do to change where that money goes. The comptroller and the Board of Estimate and Apportionment might be able to change how that money is spent. Would you make any changes to it?
The change I would make is I would fast track it. And the reason I say it like that is because the actual comptroller's office is supposed to set up accounts. So when the money comes down, the ARPA funds, they're supposed to have an account set up so that the department, like SEMA, City Emergency Management, can draw down from that money. If those accounts aren't set up in time, right, that means we slow down the process of getting the money out the door. And
Are you suggesting that the current comptroller has slowed down the process of spending ARPA money?
there has been a couple of situations that were of concern for people. And so I said, well, then what we need to do is we need to make sure, because of what's about to happen, this money has been committed, has been spent.
That money went to SLDC, though. It didn't go to the comptroller's office.
Not that particular role did not, but there were SEMA funds that were supposed to be set up through the comptroller's office, and they were supposed to be able to draw down those funds. And that took a long time to get that account set up.
She's a candidate for comptroller. Sorry, Donna Behringer. I almost
Donna
called you
Behringer.
Darlene there. I had to catch myself. That's the other candidate. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Donna, Darlene, what's the difference? Look, incumbent candidate comptroller Darlene Green, that's her. She's been in this role for 30 years. She sat down with us just last week. You can watch that full interview up on KSDK.com. Notice the different wardrobe there. But hey, let's turn now to the third candidate on the ballot this Tuesday. Joining us now on the record is candidate for comptroller Celeste Metcalf, who also has a financial management firm and a history in numbers and accounting. Seems a decent qualification for the job, at least for starters.
I would think so. I would think so, especially when you consider what the city charter says the comptroller's duties are. Comptroller is the general accountant for the city and the auditor for the city.
Do you think the voters have a working understanding of just how powerful the office can be?
I don't think they do. I don't think they do. And I'm not sure how much time it's going to take to communicate that. But the comptroller is responsible for tracking and recording all of the revenue that the city receives. And the comptroller is also responsible for recording and tracking all expenditures of city taxpayers' monies. So it's a huge and critical role, because if you don't get the information right, if you don't do the accounting correct, if you produce inaccurate information, then all decisions that are made subsequent to producing those financial reports are based on that inaccurate information.
We live in an old and shrinking city. One or two State of the State addresses ago, our current mayor, Tashara Jones, brought out a carbon copy paper of triplicate form and a typewriter to illustrate how stuck in time some of our city government has been. Yet you're describing to me an important function of the balance sheet of the government, of the people. Should that be active online for everyone to see always now?
That depends. I'm not sure everything should be active and available online for everyone to see, but we should certainly have some more state-of-the-art accounting infrastructure systems in place. We certainly need to correct that, but whether or not everything should be online, I don't know, because I'm a bean counter and I deal with what specifically are you talking about. I mean, I think there should be a lot that could be online, available and accessible. Everything, I don't know, but if we had a system in place, because not everybody is computer literate, right? If we had a system in place where those who do have the capabilities to do some of their, pay some of their bills online, that would be fabulous.
What is one promise that you can make to the voters of St. Louis? If they elect you for 4 years, what is something they will have, something tangible they can feel that you would deliver in your first 4 years?
In my first 4 years, we're going to have greater transparency and accountability. We're going to have a stronger accounting system. We're going to have a reporting structure that will produce more accurate information, because the mayor and the alderman cannot make intelligent, well-informed decisions without accurate accounting information. So you will have that from me. So please vote for Celeste Metcalf.
And of course, the primary March 4th, and we'll see which two of these three candidates emerge to face off in that runoff on April 8th. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe you had a lively Mardi Gras weekend and you're looking to slow it down. You're really yearning for some dry, deep dives with these candidates running for comptroller. A lot more of those conversations up on KSDK.com. Plus, you can watch the 5+ app for free tomorrow night and see the full extended episode of all these conversations. We're back in a moment. It's local election season, so we've been talking a lot about city and state politics, but we're watching the federal government too and monitoring more impact from Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency wrecking ball. This week, the Department of Veterans Affairs paused the decision that would have otherwise canceled hundreds of contracts, just days after VA Secretary Doug Collins announced they found $2 billion they think could have been scrapped.
I've just been told we are just the first step of almost $2 billion. That's billion with a B. That we found in contracts that are cutting. Those are things that we're saving now that we can put back into healthcare benefits, making sure that we're doing what the VA is supposed to do, and that is health and veterans benefits.
Reporters at the Associated Press got their hands on internal documents at the VA. Those documents reveal 875 contracts on the chopping block cover medical services, funding for cancer programs, medical staff recruitment, and burial services for veterans. At a virtual town hall this week, Illinois Senator and U.S. veteran Tammy Duckworth sounded off.
Trump and Musk have slashed roughly 2,400 Department of Veterans Affairs jobs, a decision that won't make things more efficient like they claim, but will actually lead to longer wait times, more backlog, and more chaos for our veterans. They've also launched a wider purge of federal workers, firing in total an estimated 6,000 veterans who are federal workers, including the folks behind the Veterans Crisis Hotline. It's an insult to folks like Francis Greenlee, who you'll hear from shortly. Francis is a Coast Guard veteran whose decades-long job was quite literally putting out fires on military ships, as well as fighting waste and fraud in the military budget.
I've always wanted to be a civil servant. I am the child of two civil servants, state workers, and my mom didn't need to turn on the TV to see the Twin Towers fall. She saw it fall from her office window when she was a state worker in New Jersey. That inspired me, both the service, to join the Coast Guard, and I started a week after my high school graduation. We're not lazy, the federal workers. My parents weren't lazy when they worked in state psychiatric hospitals. I wasn't lazy when I was in the Bering Sea and the Caribbean and trying to keep ships older than me running. And I wasn't lazy when I was working on federal contractors.
And back here at home, just across the river in Illinois, a recent state audit found the state spent more than $1.6 billion on a pair of health coverage programs for people that were not American citizens. The audit also found that 6,000 people enrolled in those programs did have a social security number, despite being classified as undocumented. Governor Pritzker proposed defunding the larger of those two programs aimed at non-citizens from 44 to 64 years old. We're back in a minute. Do you think we'll ever make another change to the U.S. Constitution? We're kind of a divided country, right? And you need a lot of buy-in. These are the things that keep me up at night. But look, politics, it often feels like a popularity contest. It's a system where we count votes to see whose career lives on, whose idea lives on, and whose careers and ideas come to an end. In a system like that, it can be tempting to just say what people want to hear. And the courage it must take to say what must be heard, well, that can be in short supply. But our nation was built with that kind of courage. And you can read about some of those leaders in the book that John F. Kennedy famously wrote, Profiles in Courage. This man's name I'm about to tell you about, he was never highlighted in that book. But he challenged his own party, and he left his own party twice. He also bent the will of American presidents, wrote an amendment into the U.S. Constitution, and built a coalition strong enough to pass it. You probably don't know his name.
He was not a showboat or an attention seeker.
But George Boutwell was a force of political nature.
Very, very ahead of his times.
In the 1830s and 40s, Boutwell was a Democrat.
The Democrats were the working man's party back then, but they were also very pro-slavery. And by the 1850s, George just couldn't stomach their pro-slavery stance. So he left the party and worked with others to found the Republican Party in the mid-1850s.
One of the pivotal moments, the U.S. Supreme Court decision denying St. Louis natives Dred and Harriet Scott their freedom and their right to be considered citizens of the United States.
He thought it was a travesty.
Boutwell went from governor of Massachusetts to congressman, forging friendships with President Abraham Lincoln and General Ulysses S. Grant, and in between them, taking on another president hostile to their legacies.
George was one of the impeachment leaders.
After Lincoln's assassination, George Boutwell led the charge, taking on a president who would go down in history as one of America's worst ever, Andrew Johnson.
He starts issuing pardons to former Confederates who had taken up arms against the Union government, presidential proclamations, executive orders, kind of reinstating the rights and privileges of all of these people who had been in rebellion against the U.S. And again, the Republicans in Congress said, whoa, wait a minute, let's go a little bit slower here. We have 4 million blacks who've recently been freed. They have no housing, no jobs. They don't know what they're going to do. We've got to take care of these people and make them full citizens.
It's in the middle of these historic debates that would define our union that a key question emerges in the push for the 14th Amendment. Who really belongs here? Who qualifies to bear that name? American.
And I think original intent is a really important principle here.
It's a question the courts have considered settled since the Civil War. But back then, we didn't have the same modern-day distinction we now use to describe documented or undocumented immigrants. Either way, if you were born here, you were a citizen.
All children today, be they documented or undocumented immigrants, they're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So George would have said they fall into the category of deserving birthright citizenship.
But that could change if President Donald Trump gets his way. In an executive order, Trump imagines a new definition of birthright citizenship, arguing the 14th Amendment never anticipated the surges we've seen in illegal border crossings.
And that's a legitimate point that the courts should decide. And if the president wants to raise that issue with the courts, I, for one, have no problem with that, because it is a distinction that didn't apply back then. It's a new situation. On the other hand, remember when people are talking about the Second Amendment, they talk about original intent. They don't take into account things how are things different today. They just say original intent. So you can't have it both ways. Either you're for original intent for what it meant then, or you say we've got to take current realities into account.
Or you can go draft a new amendment.
Right. And so I would say, yes, you can take new realities into account, but don't proclaim that in 2 weeks, every child of an undocumented immigrant no longer has birthright citizenship. That is denying the efficacy of the 14th Amendment.
So will we ever change our Constitution again? I don't know. It seems far-fetched. But if we do, it will take the kind of courage that George Boutwell showed, the kind willing to think and speak freely and boldly, focusing on what's just and fair, not just what you're told, maybe even calling out friends of yours. Until next week, we're off the record.